Hello, and thank you so much for joining in on this presentation on variety in nutrient profiles. So today we are going to learn a lot about the different food compositions. We're going to learn about macronutrients as well as micronutrients and calorie requirements for children in particular, but we're going to discuss as well what calories actually are, so you get a broader understanding of the topic in general. We're going to talk about the overall nutrient requirements in children, so not only the macronutrients, but also the micronutrient requirements. And I'm going to share guidelines and tips and tricks for you along the way to make sure that you feel truly comfortable to designing a varied meal plan for your children and, of course, for the whole family. We're going to talk about variety in nutrients in produce. So is there a different variety of nutrients to be found when the produce comes from different regions, for example, or is prepared in different ways? And of course, we're going to talk about how you can start right away to put what you have learned here into action and how you can assure that your family, yourself, your children are healthier and happier for it. So let's get started. I'm first going to introduce myself. My name is Tash Enriquez. I'm the founder and creator of Created Coaching, which is a holistic scientific coaching methodology where I include nutrition, movement coaching, as well as life coaching to provide services to adults as well as to children and families. So I'm an ICF certified life coach in results coaching, as well as in systems and relationship coaching. I am a horse-guided empowerment practitioner, which is basically coaching for humans with horses as our co-coaches. I have a degree in fitness management. I'm a nutrition coach, personal trainer, and rehab coach. And I'm also a yoga, meditation, and Pilates instructor, and have some other group fitness trainings under my belt as well. So let's dive straight into it, into our food facts. So it's always good to know some basics about macros, micros, and calories. So when I talk about macros, it's macronutrients, and that's what we're going to start with. So our macronutrients are essential nutrients that we have in most of our foods, and they are basically carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Now, all of these macronutrients are essential. And when you think about a lot of diets that we hear now, that we have in the media, you might have noticed that some of them are, for example, low carb or no carb. And yeah, if we're taking it back to the fact that all of these nutrients are essential, you might already consider that maybe a no anything diet is not really beneficial, and certainly not for children or for teenagers that are still growing and having an even greater need for these essential nutrients. So macronutrients are there for our body to provide energy and to maintain the body's structure and its system function. So all the inner organs are depending on the macronutrients as well. And most of our Western diets are quite high in carbohydrates and the unhealthy fats, and they tend to be a little bit low in protein. So really, when I come back to the no or low carbohydrate diet, I have to give them some credit, because really what they do is they just try to bring up the protein in the diet as well. And if we have a certain amount of carbohydrates, let's say a certain amount of calories, so let's say 2,000 calories that we want to consume in the day, and we reduce or we increase the protein, then naturally we have to reduce the carbohydrates and we have to reduce the fat as well. And it's just so much easier to get carbohydrates and the unhealthy fats. So for example, if you're running into any supermarket, into any convenience store, let's say you didn't plan your meals that well and you're now in need of something quick and fast, then it mostly will be carbohydrates and unhealthy fats that you can just grab on the go. So the protein requires a little bit more planning, and it requires a little bit more foresight. And so yeah, that's why our diets tend to be loaded with the carbohydrates and the unhealthy fats. And what's important to know is that protein and carbohydrates contain approximately 4 calories per gram, but fat contains 9 calories per gram. So even with the healthy fat, we just need to be mindful of the quantity that we intake and make sure that it's not the same in grams than we would do with the carbohydrates and the protein. And then we have the micronutrients. So micronutrients can be divided into 4 particular groups. So we have the water-soluble vitamins, we have the fat-soluble vitamins, we have the macrominerals, and we have the trace minerals. And so for each of the vitamins and for each of the minerals, we have a variety of recommendations when it comes to the intake, but we're going to cover the ones that are particularly important for children in a moment. I just want to talk about the water-soluble and the fat-soluble part of the vitamins. So fat-soluble vitamins, for example, are vitamin A, D, and E. And that's important to know because we can only absorb them if we actually take in fat at the same time. So it's always advisable to take in these vitamins whilst having a meal together with your meal so that you make sure that you already have that fat there. Taking vitamin D, for example, on an empty stomach without any food can definitely limit the absorption rate of that vitamin, and we don't want to have that. So I also want to come back on to the functions that we have of the calories. Sorry, let's go to the calories first. Sorry, so just cut out this bit and then we continue from here. So next we're going to come to the calories. What are calories? So the calories in the food are really the measure of the energy that we get from the foods that we're taking in. So that's important to me, that we need to eat a certain amount of calories to sustain healthy body functions. In children and teenagers, that's even more important because not only do they maintain, they actively grow. They need to actively build new fibers, new cells, and new tissue. So they have a quite high calorie requirement, as we will see in a moment, compared to a grown-up. And the same accounts for the macronutrients as well for the micronutrients. So it's very easy to think children are building new cells. They're building something new, and to that they need the actual building blocks, the building tools. And you can imagine nutrition to be just that. And then, of course, together with a sufficient amount of sleep, children will use that to actually develop, to grow healthy and strong bodies. So the nutrient intake that's required for kids from age 4 to 8, and you might be really surprised when you're reading these numbers. Okay, so the daily intake for girls in calories is 1,200 to 1,800 calories a day, depending on growth and activity level. So for sure, as parents, you know that children are going through growth spurts and they do so very frequently, right? And you might often think that your child just wakes up in the morning and overnight has grown a few inches or centimeters, which kind of really appears that way. So that's why we have that quite wide range here from 1,200 to 1,800 calories. And it is absolutely advisable to also go with what the child demands. So children know what they need. A lot of parents get very worried, especially around the age of 2.5, 3 for the first time, when children suddenly seem to eat a lot less. But that's also where their overall growth is slowing down. It then more happens in growth spurts. So it happens more sudden. And then they have longer periods where they don't seem to be that much growing, and again, might not be demanding that much food. So to a certain extent, do follow what your child asks you, do follow the advice your child is giving you really as per how much food they would like to take in. Now, 1,200 to 1,800, as I told you, this is actually pretty much what we advise for grown-up women as well. But again, we're having maintenance. We're not having that growing that we have to do. Protein. So here we have 85 to 140, that should be grams, sorry, not ounces. So between 85 to 140 grams, and that's quite a lot. And that can be very tricky to satisfy in children. If you have a child that doesn't eat meat or doesn't like meat, maybe your child likes dairy, so that's always a good protein option as well to go through. But we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail in just a while. Then we have the fruits, 1 to 1.5 cups. We have vegetables, 1.5 to 2.5 cups. We have grains, so that's our healthy carbohydrates, 115 to 170 grams. And then we have 2.5 cups of dairy as well. Let's just jump in for the boys. So we have slightly higher numbers here, but even the calories start at 1,200 as well, but go up to 2,000 calories. And again, that's pretty much in line with a grown man as well. Protein 100 to 140 grams, so a little bit higher than the protein. Fruits 1 to 2 cups, vegetables 1.5 to 2.5 cups, grains the same, 115 grams to 170 grams, and the dairy 2.5 cups. So yeah, just think about that for a moment and maybe just consider how much your child might be taking in out of these. So if you were to fulfill these requirements, there is not really much space, much allowance for a lot of sugary sweets. And this is what we need to be mindful of, that we want to make sure that the food that we do give our children is really full and dense in nutrients and has a great variety of nutrients as well. Now we're going to jump into the micronutrients here. But before we do that, we're just going to talk about why do children need to have healthy eating habits as well as physical activity habits, of course. But here we're talking more about the eating habits. And I've taken this picture from a wonderful guide that you can find on the parent platform of the ECA website. It's a downloadable guide. So healthy eating can help prevent many chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, heart disease, iron deficiency, anemia. Pretty much the same that we have in adults as well, right? It helps to prevent mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, ADHD. And when we talk about the mental health and food, so of course, having a body that's feeling energized and healthy already makes us feel better within ourselves. But there is another element to it. And I was talking briefly about in the micronutrients. I'm just going to jump back. So we have macro minerals and we have trace minerals in the micronutrients. And these macrominerals and trace minerals can basically provide a healthy and well-balanced hormonal balance in our body. So we're talking about neurotransmitters that help us to prevent anxiety and depression and ADHD. And again, that absolutely does not only account for in children, but is the same in adults as well. So changing our diet, our family's diet to an overall more healthy and well-balanced one is going to have benefits for the whole family, not just for the smaller children. And then, of course, it helps children to stabilize their energy and improve their mood. So again, if we are experiencing a lot of sugar rush and then sugar crashes, this is challenging for a young mind and a young body as well. So it is challenging for the digestive system. It is challenging for their mental health as well, to experiencing these kind of mood changes that can be brought on by sugar intake. Okay, so now we're going into some vitamins and minerals that are particularly important for children. And we're going to start with vitamin A. Again, these can be found on the parent platform in the nutrition guide. So vitamin A is one of the most crucial micronutrients because it supports healthy immune system functions. And if you have your children in nursery or in school, you know that we definitely want a good immune system to make sure that our children are not falling sick too often as they're going through. It reduces the risk of any visual impairment or growth impairment, and also prevents life-threatening childhood infections, which can be something as simple as diarrhea or measles. And we find vitamin A in dairy products, in certain nuts, such as pistachios, and in carrots. So these are quite loaded, and these are the ones that we chose to put in there because children do tend to like them, hopefully. But yeah, whenever you're not sure about a certain nutrient, and if your child is taking on enough, we're going to talk about tips and tricks a little bit later on in this presentation. Then we have iron. So children are quite easily exposed to an iron deficiency because they are growing and their overall blood volume is not yet that high. So compared to their bodies, children have a bit of a lower blood volume than we have when we're fully grown. And that's because of the constant changes that a child's body is going through in terms of their growth spurts. So, and this is particularly important in the first 5 years of life. And we get iron through meat, poultry, fish, enriched grains, beans, and tofu. So especially if you're having a child that doesn't eat meat, then you would have to take particular attention to making sure that you're getting sufficient iron into your child's diet. Iodine is another essential mineral, and iodine is needed to stabilize thyroid hormones and to provide a healthy thyroid function, which again is very important for development and growth. Basically, everything is regulated through the thyroid. And those of you who might have experienced thyroid issues themselves as a grown-up will probably relate when I say, again, it's not only the physical health that is deeply affected by the thyroid, but also the mental health. And we're getting iodine through seafood and dairy products. And then we have zinc, which is, again, essential for the immune support and infection resistance. It's quite healing as well. Giving higher doses of zinc can be quite helpful when your child has a little sniffle and you want to prevent, the full disease to come on. It's, again, very important for healthy growth in children, especially under the age of 5. And we can find zinc in beans, nuts, and dairy products. And then we have vitamin D, and especially here in this region, we talk a lot about vitamin D deficiency in adults, but we don't really take it into consideration for children that much. So we need vitamin D for proper bone metabolism and bone growth. Vitamin D is very important to absorb calcium as well and magnesium. So if there is a vitamin D deficiency, it can absolutely limit the intake of other very important vitamins and minerals as well. So we're going into a downward spiral here. And yeah, so vitamin D is really our superstar for bones, for muscles, for nerve function, for immune system, and even for respiratory infections. And we get vitamin D from eggs, oily fish, and cheese. So again, a dairy product. Okay. So nutrient variety. Now, how can we make sure that our children and we and our whole family gets the full range of nutrients that we require? A good indicator is to go with a very colorful diet. And I'm talking just natural produce and including dairy, of course, and meat if your family is eating meat. So having a wide variety and color variety of fruits and vegetables will give you a wider variety of the micronutrients as well. Yeah, so it's somewhat easier to take care of the macronutrients. Just to remember, that was your carbohydrates, your protein, and your fat. But it gets a whole lot trickier to make sure that we get all the micronutrients that we need. So what I suggest that you do is that you start to slowly introduce new colors. Don't even think about really what it is. So don't worry too much if it's a carrot or if it's an orange, for example, or if it's a sweet potato. Anything that has the color orange, if you feel your child is not eating anything that's orange, then you want to introduce something that's orange. So that way, you know, you're not stressing too much about that one certain fruit or vegetable that you want to include, but you're kind of having a wider variety for yourself already to play around with. And then, of course, it can be extremely helpful to just mix fruits and vegetables into something that you know your child likes. So, for example, if your child does like pasta with tomato sauce, then you can blend carrots and just mix it into the tomato sauce as well. And start with a smaller amount at first. Don't stress yourself. It doesn't have to be perfect. Start with a smaller amount first, and then slowly increase the amount. And then when you feel like your child is open to it, you can actually introduce them to the fact that now there's carrots in their tomato sauce as well. And you can do the same with other vegetables, of course, as well. But we tend to overdo it, and we tend to put a lot of pressure onto eating when it comes to children, and that way children become more resistant rather than open to trying new things. So sometimes if you know that you have a bit of a picky eater and a child that doesn't like to try too many new things, then just help yourself and help your child, you know, by just cheating a little bit and introducing these foods into its palate. Another thing, you know, for example, a lot of children eat pasta with pesto, for example, and then you could add something green into that as well. So putting in spinach and just blending it up and making sure it's not as visible and as obvious in the beginning. And then you slowly increase the amount of spinach that has found its way into the pesto sauce as well. So colors, yeah, can really help, thinking in colors rather than just thinking in particular food items. And again, it's just easing off the pressure on you as a parent as well. Now, another thing that I want to talk about is the nutrient composition. And the nutrient composition basically describes the variety or the varying degrees of nutrient density that we can find in the same fruit or vegetable. So for example, apple 1 doesn't have the same nutrient content than apple B. Maybe because it's a different kind of apple, maybe because the apple has come from a different place in the world, meaning it might have traveled for longer until you find it on your plate in front of you. Maybe because it's just been a longer time that this apple has been on its way. Or maybe you are now preparing the apple differently, as in, are you having it with a peel, without a peel? Are you cooking it? You know, are you making an apple sauce out of it? So what's been happening with this apple before you eat it? Maybe not the best example, but you know what I mean. If I go with carrots, carrot A has a different nutrient profile than carrot B. And again, a lot of that is completely out of our control. So we do not know how this carrot has been grown, the quality of soil this carrot has been in before it's been harvested. So there is a lot of unknown factors that we really can't take into consideration. And that can really make it tricky and almost a bit scary, because you might feel like, okay, so I'm trying to provide my child and my family with very varied nutrition, making sure that I'm getting all the vitamins and the minerals into my family, into my own body as well. And then how do I know that I really satisfy in this task? And the answer is, unfortunately, we don't always know. So one thing that we can affect is how we prepare the food. Of course, raw will have more nutrients than cooked. If we cook in water and after drain the water, then all the nutrients are going to go. Not all of the nutrients are actually heat resistant. So some of them will definitely go even if we keep the cooking liquid. So for example, if we make a soup, put in a lot of vegetables, you know, in theory, you would think, okay, we're using the water for the soup as well. However, some of the nutrients are not heat resistant. I already spoke about the travel time of our produce. We can prevent that by using frozen vegetables. So frozen vegetables, especially if they were shock frozen, which nowadays most vegetables will be, and fruits that we buy frozen. So shock frozen means that they are going from being harvested straight into a frozen state. So there's not a long time that these fruits and vegetables need to be frozen. And that just contains the nutrients until you have it in your bag at home and you're opening it up. So yeah, the way we cook, so steaming is a little bit gentler on the fruits and vegetables and on the nutrient content. Getting frozen fruits and vegetables, if they're not locally available, because again, that would mean that fruits and vegetables would have had to travel for a long period of time. So we have these options, and yeah, so these are all just small tips and tricks that we can do. However, I do have to say that nowadays we do advise to fall back onto supplements as well. So here we're going into where to start. So what are really your family's own needs and requirements, and where do you think you are in your journey? So the first thing you can always do is assess your child's nutrient variety. And sometimes you would even not have to assess, because you already know that your child tends to eat the same things over and over again. And it will take time for you to implement new fruits, new vegetables, new produce, maybe eggs, maybe more dairy, maybe whatever you would like to introduce. But that will take time, because again, you can't just, present a 5-year-old child with a whole different palette of fruit. That's just not going to happen. So in that case, I would already suggest to consider supplements. The other thing is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot be certain that our produce contains the best amount of nutrients that we would like to find in there. And again, that's a reason to consider supplements. I'm going to come back to sugar and sweets. So sugar and sweets in a child's diet have, unfortunately, quite a wide range of unhealthy implications. Of course, we can talk about teeth health at this point, but we're all aware of that. I already mentioned the physical and mental health challenges of having high sugar diets and sugar crashes. So they're really quite challenging to tolerate, especially for a young body and for a young mind. Because here we just constantly get our child into this hyper mood and then bringing it down when the sugar goes out of the system. So what happens when we intake high sugary foods, and that's again absolutely the same for adults as well, is that we have a sudden rise in blood sugar, and your body does not tolerate blood sugar very well, so it will have to produce a high amount of insulin to get the sugar out of the bloodstream. Having to produce that high amount of insulin over time is linked to type 2 diabetes, and absolutely will increase the chances of your child developing type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes used to be called old age diabetes, because traditionally, and now I'm talking 30, 40 years ago, only people of older age would get type 2 diabetes. So it was a disease of the elderly. Unfortunately, now we have children developing type 2 diabetes because their body is not able to produce enough insulin to beat the huge amounts of sugar that we have in our diet. And yeah, from a mental aspect, the same thing, we're preventing our children from developing a healthy understanding of hunger and their body's needs if we're constantly giving them high energy food, sugary food, and then letting them experience these sugar crashes, because they will want to have more of that high sugary food to go back onto that high sugar level and that high energy level, without ever learning how to create and maintain a nice high energy level in their body through healthy and nutritious nutrition. So that's one of the implementations. Another issue is that we're just taking away from our calorie allowance. So again, let's say we have our little girl who currently has a requirement of 1,400 calories. If I am now feeding a lot of sugary foods and sweets and treats, sorry. So if we're now feeding this girl a high amount of sweets and sugary stuff, sugary treats, as we like to call them, then we're just taking away from these calories. So we might still end up only feeding 1,400 calories in a day, or even less, but we're not fulfilling the protein requirements. We're not fulfilling the healthy carbohydrate requirements. So remember, there was grains. I'm just going to go back real quick. There was grains, there was dairy, there was vegetables, there was fruit. So this is all healthy carbohydrates. And of course, the protein that we absolutely need in there as well. So we won't be able to satisfy those if we're taking up all the calories through sugary treats. So coming to the end of my presentation, thank you so much for joining in today. I would love to hear your comments either below the video, or please feel free to reach out. You have my contact details there, and ask me any questions that you might have. Meanwhile, don't forget, you find a nutrition guide on the ECA platform, parent platform, and have a look there. You can download it, hang it up in your kitchen, and yeah, take a moment to assess your child's nutrition and your own nutrition as well. And then just don't stress yourself making these changes too drastically. Just slowly over time, try to include a wider variety of nutrients into your family's diet. Have a wonderful rest of your day and see you again very soon.